fact, your true self is already in position. You don't have to do anything to position it. You could say you were born that way. Think of it this way. You can no more be out of alignment than the rays of the sun cannot be aligned with the sun who emanates them. I know that's a mind bender because the programming has always been, I'm separated, I'm different, I'm not connected. I want to thank God, Source, Creator, Father, for His being emanating through all of us. Right now, we're just going to rest our minds with all the thoughts and thinking and emotions sometimes that go on within us. And relax for a moment. Just become aware of the great I Am within us and among us. Now, from that place, let's take a look and see what we're going to share today. I'm going to start with a video. You've seen this one before. This is the second video I shared in part 3. I want you to have a look. In the first 3 parts, we talked about how we fabricate God many times. And as a result, we don't even realize it. And just because we don't have a statue, maybe, we say, oh, well, that's idol worship. We don't realize that in some cases, the God we created that we believe in is truly our idol, as opposed to realizing who and what we are and who and what God in creation is. So let me give a quick overview to the last lesson, which was part 3. It was formerly called The Forsaken Creator, which we changed after about a quarter of the way through that message to The I Am Remembered. The subtitle then was The Self-Remembered, the Creator Revealed. There are several key points. The first that was that within the first 9 chapters of the book of Genesis, 5 times, Source, Creator, Father tells us that we are the image and likeness of God. Mind you, He says that both before and after what we commonly call the fall. Why is this important? Hence, the Creator's point of view hasn't changed regarding who we are and what we are. The only perspective that changed was ours, which was a result of our choices creating a closed, self-sealing logic. What does that mean? Most importantly, the true, real you is still an emanation of the great I Am. In other words, our true self, our true I Amness hasn't changed, only our perception of ourselves have. Now enters the idea of a self-sealing logic, and I'm going to expound a little bit more on that right now. To make it sound a bit more biblical and religious, we could say or would say that our thinking became sin conscious, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 2. There was a time when I was a computer program. There was a time, that's true too. There was a time when I was a computer programmer, and another way of explaining a self-sealing logic would be an infinite loop. In other words, if you were in programming, you would call it this: a missing or incorrect termination condition. When that exists, the condition would loop over and over again. So the fancy phrase missing or incorrect termination condition means in regular speech, the program doesn't know when to stop. It just starts over and over again. You could say that the program is causing the computer to be obsessive compulsive or fixating over a particular thing. Another way to understand this in programming language would be logic errors inside the loop. Again, In regular speech, this would be the computer keeps thinking the same thing over and over because there's an error in its thinking. This issue isn't about behavior, it's about thinking. Let's be honest with ourselves. Any fear-based, law-based, legalistic, judgmental system that keeps requiring the subject to keep offering sacrifices or going to the cross of Jesus over and over to ask for forgiveness has a missing or incorrect termination condition. In other words, if you keep thinking your mistakes or sin are going to keep you from union with God, not to mention emanating God, there is an error in your logic. The next key was taking that further, realizing that this self-contained sin consciousness, what its thinking does is continue to create more logic errors inside the loop of their now sin-conscious theology. Like, because I'm saved, I'm forgiven. Whenever I sin, because I have the cross, I go to it and get forgiveness. But my neighbor, who doesn't know God, sins. When he does, he can still bring God's judgment on my neighborhood. So either I better get him saved, or if he doesn't want to be saved, I need to make laws in the community to stop him from sinning. In other words, we don't want his way of living to contaminate mine. This is definitely logic errors inside a loop of sin consciousness. The next aspect we talked about, it changes the focus of whom we think we are to who God is. What does it do? It enthrones Jesus as the object of worship instead of him being the incarnate messenger, like a finger pointing toward the truth of our divine identity. This doesn't mean we dishonor our older brother, but we recognize him as the archetypical forerunner who embodied the path for us. In other words, what he is pointing to is far more important than the pointer. After all, the last thing an older brother, teacher, or parent would want is for us to continually miss the point. Guess what you call missing the point? Sinning. All right. Sinning. It's called missing the mark.
Yes.
So if we're going to apply to what sin really is when we miss the point. Right. Lastly, one of the key ways we miss the point is by focusing on the pointer, which creates a need within us for external validation. This was the fourth aspect we looked at when we came to our discovering our inner positioning. The first was how to deal with suffering. The second was our capacity for genuine compassion. The third was our relationship to truth, and not truth to tell others, but truth toward ourselves. Can we be truly honest and truthful with ourselves about ourselves? And of course, the fourth then was the need for external validation. I'm not going to take time to itemize what that means, but I would highly recommend, if you haven't, listen to part 3 so you can get those points. The final and fifth was what we're going to pick up right now. So let's have a look at that part. Depth 5 was our relationship to the present moment. Being present in the now, not the past or the future, is a full point of our spiritual development. In all the previous need areas, we're never present in the moment, whether we're suffering or wanting to fix someone or some form of lying to ourselves or wanting external validation. We are either ruminating the past or thinking of a future where what we're going through right now won't exist. That said, that brings us to the next part. At transformational levels, we practice being present. We use tools like meditation, inner reflection, and embracing all the different aspects of ourselves we discussed in the previous levels. Now, for what it's worth, I'm going to detour for a second, because I do know that some folks have ADHD, have OCD, maybe have a certain type of neurodivergence, that meditation isn't easy. Well, guess what? There are meditations for you. Yes. Proven, tried, and true. Which means all of us may meditate in different ways, but the end game is the key. So what I'm gonna do in the YouTube when this comes out in its post-production is actually list some of the names of those types of meditation, just in case you have challenges with typical meditation practices. So all of us can discover this process. At the most centered level or depth, it's living from the space of awareness that gives shape to consciousness, which now the ego serves rather than runs. Hence, being present is not something you do, it's something you are. Being present is not something you do, it's something you are. It's reducing down all the different dynamics of what we call spiritual into one idea. I am. This is not a forced concentration, but relaxed awareness. When we're in a place of relaxed awareness, which doesn't mean we may not feel stress or excitement, rather it means being centered in our true self so we can experience it in the present as it is. Another way of saying this is if we're dialed into our true self. Once again, before we proceed, let me make this unmistakably clear. Ready? This doesn't mean you won't have moments of elation and sorrow. It doesn't mean you won't have trying times or fun times. Anyone who tells you this is only adding to your incorrect termination condition. In other words, empowering self-sealing logic, our sin consciousness will continue. In simple terms, it's the logic that says, if I pray the right prayers, I read my holy book, I don't do immoral things, I stay away from immoral people who don't believe like I do, unless I'm trying to win them to my way of thinking, of course, and I practice doing what is right and acceptable. So, what I've just done is try to stop calamity from happening to me. Or worse, feeding the egoic missing incorrect termination condition, we say, evidently my righteous holy living has upset the devil and he's attacking me. That's why I'm having a calamity. No. You will experience moments of elation and sorrow, trying times and fun times. Those are going to happen in life. While you're on this planet, those are going to happen. But what does it mean? It means that your awareness of your true self, rooted in the great I am, from which comes your divine identity, will actually not be shaken or moved by what you're thinking or feeling, because you're learning to experience it in the present. Actually, you can experience both and any and all of it, and yet be centered in that space. In part of the teaching, we're going to call this centeredness by two words. Here we are. The first is alignment. Alignment. The second is attunement. This is where words can get in the way of what's truly being expressed. As a side note, this is why in the New Testament, Christ and what is written in our heart is referred to as the living word, and the Bible texts are not. Because the second you try to articulate it with words, it doesn't always come out the same. For example, go into a garden, smell a rose. Now try to explain that fragrance to somebody else. Understand? That's why what we're talking about is very difficult sometimes with words to communicate, but we're trying. And what I'm hoping for, like in the prayer, is that it awakens us to an awareness rather than just a belief in what the words say. Texts are good, but even the most noble will still not have a gram or ounce of life in them. My point, alignment and attunement is not something you do, but something you are. The egoic mind wants to know how to be aligned and how to get attuned. Why? So it can think about it and then feel good that it thought about it. But the egoic mind and its thinking cannot attain either, ever. Why? It's not designed to. It's designed for a different purpose. But when we start living from a place of alignment and attunement, it will even respond differently. What it can and will do is humbly rejoin by thinking thoughts born of our true self, our I amness, which is already aligned. So, maybe just then you could hear the ego saying, wait, you're speaking in circles. That doesn't make sense. If I was already aligned, why wouldn't I be thinking this way? And that, my friend, is how the self-sealing logic, the missing incorrect termination condition, sin consciousness stays in its endless loop. Today, let's break the code, terminate the loop once and for all. And in programming language, one of the terms for this is proper control flow. After all, we do like phrases like, I want to be in the flow of the Spirit. Right? I want to go with the flow. So let's look at these two aspects from this point of view. The first, alignment is position, attunement is calibration. Consider that alignment is like a position one holds or a state therein, and attunement is calibration, like dialing in the particulars. Please note, there's not an inference that the transmitter is being selective on who can receive or be rejected. In short, this has nothing to do with the Old Testament bipolar God that is blessing people one moment and cursing them same people in the next. Or such a God telling his followers, because you worship rightly, you are my special holy ones. Now go and invade a neighborhood next door and demand that every person believe like you do. If they refuse, kill every man, woman, child, and beast, which is exactly what Numbers 31, Deuteronomy 3, Deuteronomy 7, chapter 20, Joshua 6, Joshua chapter 8, and of course, 1 Samuel 15, to mention a few. There's more. No, the nature of the great I am, or for our terms of alignment and attunement, is a divine transmitter of love, light, and life. You can't pack those into love, light, and life. This is why Jesus said, my Father, many times when speaking to the people. In other words, the guy I'm talking about is a little different than the one you have. See, my Father causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. See, my Father doesn't have it rain on the just and say, sorry for you sinners. Different, different, different. He came to change our programming. One of the key purposes of the incarnation is to show us what alignment and attunement is like. The challenge for most who claim to follow Jesus is that they have found their position, but haven't calibrated themselves to their divine nature. Let me put this another way. Years ago, PK and I attended a ministry that had a satellite network literally from church to church, who signed up and purchased the satellite equipment from them. PK actually worked in what was called satellite division. Not in the technical department, but in the customer church service department. At that point, we learned a lot about satellites. Herein is the point. For proper signal receptions, satellites not only need to be in position. Here's what positioning looks like. So the satellite is in position. It's in alignment. It's aligned with the transmitting base. Not because it figured out how to align itself, but because it was created that way. Or you could say it was built that way. But now it also needs to be calibrated to the proper frequency once in position. Here is the negative and the positive. The positive is your true self is already in position. You don't have to do anything to position it. You could say you were born that way. Think of it this way. You can no more be out of alignment than the rays of the sun cannot be aligned with the sun who emanates them. I know that's a mind bender because the programming has always been, I'm separated, I'm different, I'm not connected. What I'm suggesting is that it's simply to become aware that you're in position. Relax. In Hebrews 4, it's called the rest of God. The negative for some, and this is where the challenge can come in, and actually does exist in my view, is they believe that belief, and rather than become aware of it, assume that belief is enough. So we become worshipers of the finger that points to the sun rather than embracing what the sun emanates. This is where calibration becomes necessary. Now that we got our satellite in position, what has to happen is calibration. Now, in this particular picture, it's the idea of, because it's in outer space, it's happening even from the ground-based control, which is part of the issue. You see, it happens from within the base control, not from something out there or someone out there. Let's attune ourselves to the source of the transmission. Once again, this is just a metaphor, but only to help make the point. Our true self, our I amness, is the constant that's in position to emanate the great I am. You're simply built that way. Nothing more and definitely nothing less, ever at any time. In other words, our true self is always in position to emanate the infinite intelligence of the Father, which the Apostle Paul calls the mind of Christ. Our true self is always in position to emanate the universal consciousness or limitless awareness of our union with our source, God Creator, which is rooted in love, which is not only an intelligence or consciousness, but the very nature of who we are. To be straight to the point, you are always in position. The delusion is that you're out of position, that you are separated from the Father, Source, Creator, the great I am. I know we fabricate scriptures to insinuate that, particularly that we are separated from God. But to be specific, of the 66 verses in the Bible that says we're separated from God or the Lord or Christ, all being in the Old Testament, the ones that are in the New Testament don't exactly say what our logic errors inside our sin-conscious loop tell us. Rather, there's a verse by the Apostle Paul that puts all into perspective. In other words, shows both transmitter and alignment from the source God Creator, Father's point of view. It's here in the book of Romans. Romans 8:37 through 39, New King James Version. Yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am persuaded neither death nor life, that's a big one, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. How about the Heart Translation? Rather, in all these things we are more than conquerors through the one who has loved us. For I have been persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels nor archons, if you're into Gnosticism, you know exactly what I'm saying right there. That's what Paul is saying. Nor archons, nor things present, nor things eminent, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, or any other creature will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in the anointed Jesus our Lord. How about one more? Mirror. On the contrary, in the thick of things, our triumph remains beyond dispute. Pause. The second you think, I feel separated from God, or you think somebody else who maybe doesn't even believe like you is separated from God, the truth remains beyond dispute. His love has placed us above the reach of any onslaught. This is my conviction. No threat, whether it be in death or life, be it celestial messengers, demon powers, or political principalities. Nothing known to us at this time or even in the unknown future, no dimension of any calculation in time or space or any device yet to be invented has what it takes to separate us from the love of God unveiled in our Lord Jesus Christ. So there are other verses about separation. I'm going to get there in a minute. It's just one or two in the New Testament that seem to suggest it, but the second you actually read just a bit more, you realize there's no such thing as separation but here. Let's reiterate the point. You are already aligned, right? You are already aligned and in position. Why? Because you are the breath of and the light rays of the great I am. Like the light rays of the sun cannot be separated from it any more than breath can be separated from the air it breathes. Let me make this point even more straightforward. You can't separate the sun from its light. You can only hide from it. As Jesus said 3 times in the Gospels, no one, when he has a lamp, puts it in a secret place or under a basket, but on a lampstand. Well, he's saying that because guess what was happening? Through their veiled theology, the light they had was being put under the basket. Why is he saying this? Because that's what many of us do. The lamp is lit, the light is shining. And such a divine light can never be quenched, as we just read. Yet we cover the light with our egoistic thinking. In other words, the missing or incorrect termination condition exists in how we think about ourselves, the source, God, creator, father, and put a blanket over a perfectly aligned satellite dish that only needs to be calibrated to the truth of what it really is. Get this. Attunement isn't as complicated as our ego or someone else's would like us to think. For example, the 2 New Testament verses that seem to say we are separated from God, if we read them for what they actually say, they say something very different. Let's have a look. Ephesians 4:18, New American Standard, updated version. Being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. We've read these verses before, and I'll mention it later in another teaching we did. What stands around it? We were never separated from the love of God. We were never separated from the reality of God within us. Put it bluntly, because it's still, when I use terms like that, God is still another. Actually, it is that we are an emanation of that very life. We are the I am revealed. Think of it this way. in the natural. The blood that's flowing through your veins, the iron that is in that vein. I know we said right away we got that from our mother and father. Well, there is a truth to that, but they got it from somewhere too. You know what? One of the places they got it from is a supernova in the universe somewhere, an exploding star, a compressed black hole. All these aspects of the universe created part of the very physical attributes you have. That's why you are, if you do any scientific study, you will find that you are made up of space dust. Say, well, I thought God made him. How do you think he did? That physical side. Say, well, I thought God did. You did it with him. You were there. This is all part of you. You are no accident. Think of how many eons of years it took to get you here. Why? Glad you asked. There's another verse. Colossians 1:21 mirror. Your indifferent mindset alienated you from God into a lifestyle of annoyances, hardships, and labors. Yet he has now fully reconciled and restored you to your original design. It's the mindset. Colossians 1:21, Aramaic. I love the way the Aramaic reads it here. Also from earlier, you were a foreigner and a whispering enemy in your rumination. Rumination? When you're ruminating, that you're thinking about it. You're thinking about it. It can be a meditative thing. Sometimes we don't realize we're meditating. But that could also be that endless loop of sin consciousness that we have, that we always try to put everything into that, and it just morphs it into something different. It all comes down to recalibrating our thinking to true divine reality. The point, we remain a living pattern of God. Sin consciousness doesn't erase that. It just convinces us it's gone. In other words, sin consciousness doesn't sever the connection, it creates the illusion that it's severed. To put it plainly, it's not the light of our I amness that isn't shining. We're still patterned from the source God creator. But guilt and separation thinking or mindsets shrouds us into forgetting or blindness. To put it in Old Testament terms, it veils the reality of the Ark of the Presence, despite the fact that it's right in front of you. One of the things about that whole veil concept, you have the Ark, and then you have the veil, and then the priest is standing on the other side, and he only goes in once a year to make a certain sacrifice, that whole thing, right? The illusion there is God's shut off, or really our true self is shut off, and we can't see it. But in some cases, it's only feet away from you, meters away from you. And if you've gone through Genesis Factor, which we hope to do soon, here again, you'll find that the temple is just a replica of the body. The human mind is the Holy of Holies. You may say, so how do you recalibrate? How do you come into attunement? It's not what you actively do. It's what you realize and then don't do. Ego's like, I want in. Let me explain. Since we partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, our world became a dynamic of warring opposites. Good, evil, right, wrong, in, out, mine, yours, us, them, godly, satanic, or by extension, holy, sinful. But that wasn't the goal, actually. Rather, from that rubble of dust, what was intended to emerge will emerge not as opposites, but as complementary contrasts. Let me give you an example. There's an old Buddhist koan by Hakun Ikaku, if I said his name right, from the 18th century that says, You know the sound of two hands clapping? What is the sound of one hand? Well, to some, some of us are actually, right, we're concentrating. What kind of sound does it make, Okay. One hand can't clap. Now, some may be thinking the obvious. The sound one hand trying to clap is no sound at all. You have this. See, got them all obsessing and right. They're all obsessive compulsive. But I can't help myself. I gotta help myself. I gotta figure out a way. Gotta figure out a way. Gotta figure out. But here's the point. That's what the sin consciousness does. It does that kind of thing. Maybe it's not as funny. So here's the point. When you're out of attunement, everything becomes a contrary warring opposite. Good, evil, us, them, godly, satanic, hence the serpentine mind. But when we recalibrate that thinking, such ruminations change and we can see the complementary contrast. In other words, in that egoistic way of thinking, my left hand is an enemy to my right hand. But they are not. They're complementary. They can do a whole lot of things together besides clap. Should I do it closer to the mic so I can drive you up a wall more? Sorry. You had to, if you're watching this, you had to see the look on our sound engineer's face when I did that. Sorry. That's true. He's got headphones on, so that really must have been. For example, one hand trying to clap will become exhausting. Muscles will cramp. They will tire to the point of stopping. The point is, when we egoistically think the opposite is always evil, wrong, the other, the them, the satanic, the sinful, we will try to extinguish what could be complementary and a necessary component. I mean, we saw that in the Garden of Eden. First, Adam and Eve are lovers, right? The man and the woman, actually, not Adam and Eve. I'm not going to get all technical right now for the sake of the story. And all of a sudden, they partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then God shows up. And God's like, what happened? And the man says, it's the woman you gave me. Now she and God is the enemy. Understand something. I'm not speaking of murder, violence, or manipulation, although we can see how such thinking can develop. We try to extinguish what appears to be opposites to the unenlightened mind. What I'm speaking of now is that which is in us. How many of us think that anxiety is bad and we need to get rid of it? What happens to if you have that sin-conscious mind or that endless loop mind? Now I become anxious about being anxious. And I only create more pressure on myself to get rid of the anxiety. Rather than maybe for a moment, from that I amness, be present with it. It's there for a reason. How many of us, again, when we have anxiety, we want to get rid of it? Or in the same way, how many of us think that feeling sad or feeling sorrow is bad and we need to get rid of such feelings? Consider this. There's a part of our physical makeup called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is known as the reptilian complex, or as some may say, the reptilian part of our brain. Isn't it interesting that it's called the reptilian complex, which seems to coincide with the notion of the serpent that points us to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Let us ponder these thoughts. The point is, the part of us which seems unholy, sinful, wrong, or evil by our other so-called egoistic good side sees them as the enemy. Things must be done away with, destroyed, removed, proclaimed victory over. Thus, the doctrine of spiritual warfare is anything but spiritual. It's born from the egoistic nature to do away with, destroy, remove, and have the victory over. I remember when a friend of mine lost his parent and was feeling grief of that loss. He was a minister. Rather than embracing the process, he began to rebuke it in Jesus' name, calling it a foul demon of grief. Listen to me. Listen. That's not the way to deal with it. When you start rebuking things like that, which are actually part of your experience, it will have the appearance of leaving in one respect. But it really isn't leaving. It's being shackled into the subconscious of our being. And at some point, it's going to break those chains and reemerge and show up in other forms, like depression, relationship conflicts with those you supposedly love, physical illness, just to mention a few. Then we're back to rebuking and resisting the devil again. Foul spirit of sickness. To put it in those terms, that's resisting the wrong devil. That's opposing yourself. Rather, the devil that we would need to be resisting in those terms is the logic errors inside the loop. So no, consider this. The ministry of Christ is to reconcile us to God. To put that statement into the core of what we're saying, it's to reconcile our mindset back to the mind of Christ, our I amness withinness. It first begins to realize sin is a non-issue. It's only an issue to those who believe in blood sacrifice religions. That's why you find throughout the New Testament it's full of blood sacrifice language. But the second you start pulling that apart, you see a whole different message. Virtually all the religious systems that the apostles were addressing had that belief system. But at the root of the message, things were very different. Listen to the Aramaic translation of 2 Corinthians 5:19. For God in the Messiah, with his greatness, he that shepherds the world never considered their sins to them. Never considered their sins to them. A more fancy King James would say didn't impute their sins. It wasn't an issue to God. That's hard if you've been programmed that the reason why Jesus died was to get rid of your sins. You realize Jesus was forgiven sins long before he ever went to the cross? Happened many times. You know what we do? Well, he was paying it forward. You know, he was forgiven sins knowing that he's going to die, and then that person's sins will then be really forgiven. That's actual theology and of a certain denomination I won't go into right now. The point is, what we considered an issue wasn't an issue to our true self, source, God, creator, the great I am. It's not implying there wasn't some form of sin or negative, we're not saying it didn't exist in the mind or practice of a person. But as far as the divine nature is concerned, it wasn't considered that way. Neither those parts of us that are desired by the opposing concepts, the good and evil concept of opposites rather than complementary counterparts, the ones that we try to get rid of, we try to cast them out, but rather, God would have us do the Christ thing, reconcile them to ourselves. To put it another way, reintegrating them within us. Once again, if there was something to resist, it would be the sin-conscious thinking that says you need to get rid of that bad, evil thing. To put it in religious terms, the accuser that says get rid of the sin is the one we need to get rid of. It was about 30 years ago, I was listening to a particular piece of classical music, and I heard this rise from within me. Stop trying to be a perfect Christian, just be a whole one. Be a whole person. It's taken me 30 years to understand what that meant, and I'm still learning. But in short, it means to redeem, to reintegrate those parts of myself or of ourselves that we allowed ignorantly or forcibly to fragment into pieces through external experience. It's almost comical to religiously and theologically claim we're one with each other in Christ in empty belief and yet be fragmented within ourselves. But therein is the ultimate point. As we reintegrate ourselves into wholeness through our awareness of our union with our I amness, we also recognize our union with the rest of creation. As we said earlier, attunement isn't about what we actively do, but actually what we don't do. Herein is the divine truth, thus the direct path, if we need to use that term. It's forever positioned as the image and likeness of God or emanation of the great I am, Christ. It's always that, never changes. When we realize this, there is no path but presence. Hear what I just said. There is really no path but presence. Understand something. God in creation doesn't respond to your shouting demands or finger-pointing rebukes. Rather, God in creation responds to your presence. And that presence has no consideration of those parts of ourselves that we've considered sinful, as evil, satanic, or wrong. Rather, with loving embrace, walks them into the light, reintegrating them into the whole person. Embracing the once believed ugly parts of ourselves helps recalibrate our consciousness of ourselves, God, creation, and reality. Consider this. Maybe you've been having conflicts with your spouse or significant other. Then you lash out. Then you feel badly. Then you may ask them to forgive you for being that way. Then you feel better about yourself and maybe even the situation. Till the next time. Herein is the issue. You lashing out about their behavior toward you is really about your egoic mind running a protection program because of a part of ourselves that's chained up within us. It could be that grief, remember that grief that we rebuked a bit ago in our example? Years ago even? Now has become something else, and we start lashing out. But here's another point. Because if we return to our one hand attempting to clap the air, sees the other hand that it claps as an enemy, we realize that our grief or any other part, if we can come to this, rather than it being an enemy, it's a complementary counterpart we can applaud in wonderful ways. Grief can be a very beautiful thing. Sounds crazy. I once heard a great definition of grief. I'm picking on grief today, I don't know why. Maybe somebody needs to hear it. Okay? Grief, especially like when you lose a loved one, grief is love with no place to rest anymore. You love that person, you were sharing that love with that person, now they're gone. And that love is still going out, but it can't find that place to rest anymore. Eventually, we learn you don't, how can I say, you don't stop loving that which has gone on. What you do, though, is you start to learn to live with the joy of the love that you shared. Because guess what? This is eternal love. This is a love that is larger than this universe that abides within you. So there's always more love to go around. You don't have to say, oh, well, they're gone now, so I'm not going to love there anymore. Now I got to put my love here because after all, I only got so much love. It doesn't work that way. Let's take this further. Remember that guy within ourselves? When we embrace all those inner shadows and bring them into the light, seeing what they are for what they truly are, not going to the dark places with a flashlight, by the way. Okay? So I would suggest that you may want to look at what I'm talking about here. This is what I referred to earlier, was in the teaching I did call I Am That I Am Part 3, Facing the Shadowlands. Okay? So, the last thing we want to do is become a witch hunter, a demon slayer, okay? And go into those parts of ourselves to deal with that stuff. On the other hand, consider this. Like anyone held in the dark of solitary confinement for a long period may be hesitant to come out to the light. Yeah. This is why whatever aspect of ourselves need presence, we need to be present with those parts. Matter of fact, just be present with them. When they occur, and don't go on the witch hunt. Where's that? I'm going to now go home and look for all the sins in my life. And stop. They'll be there. But when they rise, when it happens, when it occurs, be present. Don't hate yourself. Remember, said a couple sessions ago, don't be judgmental about you. There's an old saying from Margaret Tyson's speech in 1959. She was the dean of the University of Virginia in the nursing department. She said this, you've probably heard it before, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. This doesn't just apply to people. It applies to those suppressed aspects of yourselves as well. Those parts of ourselves will come into the light when they feel safe. And they feel safe when they know the morality police with the judge, jury, and executioner is nowhere to be found. Once again, the inner Pharisee rises to the forefront at that point and says, are you saying that if someone did a heinous crime, we should just overlook it? They are to be responsible. Once again, the serpent near the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is looking for a gotcha. Let me put it this way. You may be watching right now from your prison cell, maybe even because you're serving life because of a crime. But guess what? Here's the point. Yeah, you may be in prison. Maybe your life is going to be there till the end. But you don't have to live in an inner prison for the rest of your life. So I'm going to give you an analogy, and I hope it will help in two different ways. So I'll use both. And what's interesting is I heard two different people say similar analogies. So it's like, okay, I'm going to use these. This is great. First of all that is a rubber ball. In its natural state, it's round and simply exists. The same is true with this other one, beach ball. If you take that rubber ball and try to squeeze it and change its shape, guess what? There's going to be resistance. To maintain its deformed state, there's a tremendous amount of pressure and force you're going to have to apply. The same is true with the beach ball. If you try to suppress it underwater, it's going to take a whole lot of effort to maintain that and balance it like that under the water. Eventually, if you get a little tired and you start to release the pressure, that beach ball may come right up, splash you, hit you in the face, bounce all over the place. All right? But the point in both cases is they are seeking their original state. The rubber ball is resisting being oblong or whatever shape you're trying to push it in. That's why it bounces. The beach ball is not made to submerge, but to float. It's completely content with sitting on the waves and gently moving with them. Here's the point. Because you are the image and likeness of God, the emanation of the great I Am, that is your normal, natural state. This is why there comes a point in virtually everyone's life where they start to seek God or their part in creation or in some way, what is their connection to the universe? Why? It's that place because there's parts of us here that are like being pushed underwater. And most of the time we're pushing ourselves or we're trying to change the shape of the ball. And it's exhausting. That's why sin consciousness is exhausting. That's why there was so many sacrifices in that temple. They actually had to build a drainage system. What's wrong with that picture? We are seeking our natural state. And the thing is, it's not really seeking, but a deep inner awareness that we are somehow more, that we are connected to something more. The beautiful part of this is that our true relaxed state is love, light, and life. It's called peace. This is the divine peace behind all that thinking we do, all those feelings we feel. When you relax like the beach boil, say that again.
I love it.
I guess we needed to laugh because everything else is kind of serious, you know? Yeah. All the effort trying to submerge parts of ourselves is exhausting and takes a whole lot of effort. But when we simply rest in our true I amness, which is not preoccupied with opposites and opposing forces, we're able to ride any wave the ocean brings. Doesn't mean you don't experience the wave. Could be a good wave. Could be a rough wave. But if you're there, then you can experience it in the now. And here's the crazy thing about experiencing emotions in the now rather than resisting them, or thinking rather than resisting it. And I'm going to give you a little exercise on how to possibly do this. Is when you don't, they run their process. See, when you resist, there's an old saying, what you resist persists. And we're very good at it to the point where we so suppress those things where they're chained to the deep subconscious wall, and it comes out in all other ways, and we don't even realize it. Oh, well, that's maybe what God wanted. No. Stop. Unless you're the God that wanted it. I'm good with that. Because you have that creative power, so you can call it that if you want. But there's a better way. There's another way. There's a higher way, a more true way. It's about going into the dark places within ourselves when they occur and allowing ourselves to be together with the other part of ourselves, even though it seems to be yucky. It changes. Maybe you had a grief thing 30 years ago. You don't think about it much because you've got it nicely chained up somewhere inside. But it comes out maybe in your relationships. Maybe it comes out in your physical body with certain ailments, pains, all those things. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's enough little critters called germs and viruses going around that you don't need your own self to afflict yourself. And even then, you can address the little germs and viruses a whole lot better with your body being in a healthy immune place because of these issues. Because I can tell you now, and believe me, we have a nutrition consultant here, okay? You can eat all the right foods, drink all the right protein drinks and veggie drinks and all that stuff. But if you got internal turmoil going on, that only goes so far. It's going into those places. Which brings me to a way to possibly conclude today. So we're going to stop here, but I'm going to give you an idea, just a kind of a spatial idea. A good example of your thinking is like a freeway. Thoughts are just constantly flying by. Some of them keep getting on and off the same freeway. Right? That's what we were talking about, that loop. The thing is, if you think you're actually going to jump in the middle of the freeway and stop those cars,
No.
it's not going to happen. We can observe those thoughts. We can choose which ones we want on our freeway. But the point is even then, something else has to happen. So let me suggest this. Leave the freeway alone. Don't even go on the freeway to stop a thought. Go the opposite direction into a garden or into a forest. I'll explain to you what I'm saying in just a minute. Because there, in the background, you may hear the cars still flying around, but it's still a different experience in the forest or the garden. Yeah, it's good, just a different sensation. So think of it this way. This is your freeway. But if you can, and you can do it, leave the freeway and go to the garden. And just allow yourself to be there. What you'll find is that down deep in there, past even the emotions, there's an eternal consistency that's present. And like I said, maybe because of your neurological makeup or because we're OCD or ADHD and CDO, as they tell my wife is CDO, that she's so OCD that even the letters of OCD needs to be in alphabetical order. The point is that there are ways to do this. One is guided meditations. For some folks who have concentration issues, there's guided meditations where somebody can actually guide you in the meditation. It works. You can do it. Maybe that's not your flavor. There are others. The point is that there's some way for everybody, because all of us have different pathways here. Some of us, with the emotional stuff that we're rambling on and moving, all that sort of stuff, we can actually create neural pathways that way. And that means it's harder to change when they're part of now your physiological makeup. But they can be. I mean, if you create them, you can create another path. Yeah. So we're going to stop here and pick this up next week for the final part, which is 5, the eternal return. Done this before, but I'm going to be a little bit more detailed. The gospel through the Wizard of Oz.